Hey everybody, Dan Ward here, and welcome back to Entrepreneurship Lessons from my book Lift. In the previous video, we looked at the first few steps in launching your entrepreneurial journey. We talked about doing the reading, finding a problem that interests you, and deconstructing that problem. Now it's time to start going public. You've probably heard the phrase, it's better to beg forgiveness than to ask permission. Forget that garbage. Entrepreneurs don't do either. So it's not about asking permission because we don't need it. It's not about begging forgiveness either. We don't need that either. Instead, we're making the decisions that we can make and doing them out loud, doing them in a transparent, visible way, exercising autonomy and accepting accountability. For example, when Alphonse Pénaud did his experiments on aircraft design, he didn't ask for permission. Who would he have even asked? And there was no one he needed to apologize to. He just said, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And he said that out loud. So the question for you to explore is, what would it look like if you just declared your intent? Get specific about what you're proposing. Be particular about the thing you can do. So one way to do this is to publicly say out loud, a problem I'm interested in is, and then fill in the blank. Or a thing I'm wondering about is, share your questions on LinkedIn, on a Slack channel, or over lunch with a friend. Sharing your question out loud might help you find someone else who has already answered that question, or you might find people who are asking that same question and may want to join you in finding an answer. Sharing your question out loud means you need to have a question. Where do we get good questions from? From doing the reading, from finding a problem, and deconstructing the problem. Everything in the first video. Now, let me just add that sharing your question is not a negative sign of ignorance. It's a positive sign of curiosity. It is a healthy and productive and smart thing to do. So, how would you finish that sentence? The thing I'm trying to figure out is... Okay, innovation and intrapreneurism and entrepreneurism are team sports. Don't try to do this alone. The previous step might help you assemble your roster by attracting people who are also interested in your question, but now we're talking about building a team, and that means more than just listing some names. It's about building a culture and establishing norms. So the question to ask at this point is, what are some beliefs and behaviors or norms that you would want your team to exhibit? Do you want a team that goes fast? A team that values listening? A team that's hyper-curious or supportive or equitable? This should be an ongoing discussion with all the members of the team. Culture isn't static, so don't be surprised if the team's culture changes over time. In fact, be surprised if it doesn't change. So your homework is to check out the Community Rule website, which provides some great templates and frameworks for how teams can make decisions and take action. Talk about that with someone and play around and see what kind of models you can build using that site. Okay, now we've done some reading, we've found a problem, we've declared our intent, and we've started building our team. The next step now is to do some experiments. This is one of my favorite lines from Lift. Don't take risks, do experiments. I like this because it's actionable advice. See, telling people to go take risks is pretty vague. There's no risk-taking method, and it's even worse when people say go take reasonable risks or go take safe risks. Go do dangerous things in a safe way? I'm not quite sure what to do with that advice. But when the advice is go do an experiment that is specific and actionable, there is such a thing as an experimental method. So Monsieur de Groot's story here on this slide is that in 1864, he built this contraption, he climbed aboard, he jumped off the roof, and he crashed and died. When Octave Chanute told the story in his book, he pointed out that a few prior experiments with a bag of sand would have revealed the flaw in the design. If we're focused on taking risks, we're going to do what de Groot did, and that didn't turn out so well. But if we focus on doing experiments and gathering data, we might actually find safer ways to learn. Okay, so let's get specific. What do we mean by experiment? My favorite definition of an experiment is an intervention followed by an observation. An intervention, that means we're going to change something. Add, subtract, rearrange, modify. And then an observation, that means we'll pay attention to what happened. We'll collect some data, we'll reflect on it. In any given experiment, I suggest keeping your interventions singular and your observations plural. So change one thing, then measure a lot of things. So the question for you to consider is, what singular intervention can you make? And what plural observations can you make? When I think of experiments, I like to think of RICE. It's an acronym I coined a while back that stands for Rapid, Iterative, Collaborative Experiments. In other words, we're not talking about doing one big, slow experiment all by yourself. Instead, the key is to quickly do an iterative, incremental series of experiments with other people. You may collaborate with the rest of your team, of course, but you may also want to include folks from outside the team, potential customers or users, advisors or coaches, mentors, and students. So be expansive and inclusive with your collaboration lift. A diverse set of perspectives just might be the key to unlocking lessons from your experiments. The RICE model also describes the most effective aviation experimenters from LIFT. For example, Alberto Santos Dumont, he's the main character in Chapter 3 of LIFT, built this series of airships. This layout that you see on the screen here is from a book titled A Dream of Flight. It's a kid's book, but I highly recommend it. The layout you see here shows the iterative approach to Alberto's experiments. Each of his designs fixed a flaw from the previous versions, strengthened a weak point, or provided some new function. It's a very RICE-y way to do experimentation. Now, the first few of his designs tended to crumple and crash pretty quickly. Eventually, though, he came up with a design that won some major prizes, and he even built a small personal airship he'd use to travel from his apartment to a local cafe for lunch and back home. So, thinking about the problem you're interested in, and the problem that you have deconstructed, what would your series of experiments look like? What materials would you use to build them? And under what conditions would you test them? And most importantly, who's helping you with all of that? And finally, this entrepreneurial thing is all about creating stuff that people will pay for, right? Stuff they will find valuable. So we need to be dealing with real customers, real users, real sponsors, and real products and services. That's why my favorite type of entrepreneurial experiment is to make something real and offer it to someone real. Then see what happens. That's the experiment. Make something real and offer it to someone real. Okay, that's it for now. Join us next time as we take a look at one of the main themes in LIFT, studying